All right, so today is March 5th. This is our weekly Operator Framework Working Group meeting. As always, please abide by the code of conduct and let's get started. So a few things on the agenda. The first thing I added myself just to make sure that we kept everyone up to date with what we're doing. But the main two things that we're working on right now are moving to cap controller from RUCPAC and implementing some CRD upgrade safety. So if you're interested in either of these things, and especially if you are interested in helping work on these things, definitely give those a read. We've already begun working on these things. So these briefs are essentially in the in progress state in terms of actually implementation. This is not something that we're necessarily looking for review on, although if you read something here and you see something that you want to make a comment on, by all means, we want to know. But I'll go into a quick detail here, but I think for the most part, folks know what's going on. But real quick, so support for cap controller, as we talked about in the past, we're essentially trying to add a new extension API, which in the operator controller repo, which is namespace scoped. And then that's sort of equivalent to the cluster extension API, except that it's namespace scoped. But then the implementation of that under the hood is going to be using Carble's cap controller, which is something that should get us up and running fairly quickly. We've decided that RUCPAC is not something we want to keep pursuing. That's sort of work that's going to happen separately as a follow-on, but eventually the plan is that we'll get the extension API and cap controller working and then follow up with removal of the cluster extension API and eventually also RUCPAC. So that's that work. Any comments or questions on that before I move to the next one? Cool. CRD upgrade safety. So essentially, this is the same sort of thing that we do in OLM v0, where we want to have OLM v1 provide a good user experience around making sure that upgrades of controllers and anything that provides CRDs are safe. And by safe, we mean won't cause clients to break, won't cause data to be lost in etcd. So this brief is essentially about how we're going to go and implement that. We think that the primary way to do that is by introducing some functionality in cap controller. So we've engaged the Carvel community to implement some stuff there. Those are the two main things. Any questions on CRD upgrade safety? Okay, cool. Adam, you've got a question, it looks like.
Yeah, so with the conversion of KApp, whatever it's called, the KApp controller from RUCPAC, there's like a bunch of different documents in a bunch of different places. So just wondering what the timeline is and what the best place to follow that conversion process would be, where that's at, whether it's a milestone or something like that. And then just tangential to that, what type of Helm support is going to be in there. I know there's been conversations that it should be any deployable object. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bundle or something like that. So just want to know if that's going to be covered once the conversion happens.
So I'll answer the second part and I'll turn it over to Barsha. Hopefully you can help answer the first part. So the second part on the Helm support is that one of the reasons we chose to sort of pursue this KApp controller integration is because it sort of handles that stuff out of the box. The primary focus right now, though, is not on updating our catalogs to support Helm charts or building APIs as part of the extension API to support Helm charts. That's not the primary focus yet. The initial primary focus is let's make sure that all of the catalog APIs that we support in OLM v0 and all of the content that people have built with OLM v0, let's make sure that those things will work with cap controller and the extension API. So that's the primary focus now. Having said that, obviously, like one of the goals is eventually to support more than just registry v1 bundles. One of the big reasons to look at OLM v1 in the first place was to be less opinionated about what the bundle contents can be. So Helm seems like as good a format as any for packaging manifests and making that possible. So I think like fairly quickly we'll start thinking about this once we have a good handle on just getting the initial implementation done and making sure that it works with registry v1 bundles. So I'd say like that's probably next on the list after we do the registry v1 stuff. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I know that's sort of hand wavy, but it's sort of front of mind. Yeah, go ahead, Marcia.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up with a few more links and updates, so you can finish and then I can give inputs on that.
Yeah, so the last thing I was going to say, so at Red Hat, some of our product managers have also been talking about this, and there's some interesting things that they've been proposing, and we've got an internal meeting coming up where this is going to be a subject of conversation in terms of like specifics around when and how and what and all of that kind of stuff. So nothing concrete yet, but something we're thinking about at least. All right, Barsha.
Adam, I just mentioned the meta issue, which tracks the work on switching Rackpack with KApp controller. I'll also update with the recent work which is being done with respect to that. So that would be the common place in upstream to follow the work on that particular brief. And in terms of the Helm support, Joe covered most of it with respect to timeline. I just wanted to mention one more thing, that KApp controller in general has an inbuilt support for installing Helm charts and including templating for it. So by switching to KApp controller, we natively get the Helm support which we want, that we inherently wanted to introduce in bundle deployment. But in terms of actually supporting it through the extension API is still a matter of discussion, which I think Joe covered it, that we are working on it and probably will have more info on that soon. So yeah, that's the update.
Yeah, and I guess one more point on that is we're planning to add a admission webhook in, like once we integrate KApp controller into the extension API and use it as part of operator controller, we're planning to add a validating webhook that blocks use of the KApp controller APIs by anything other than the extension controller. That's primarily because we just don't have a good enough handle on, well, we're not planning on actually using all of the other APIs that are provided by KApp controller other than Kevin, I think I was thinking that we'd put it in the upstream, at least for now, and we can decide how we do this later. But essentially just to make sure that we're only trying to support what we're actually using in the extension API. And if there are users that decide they want to go and experiment with KApp controller, even with operator controller installed, then we can talk about that as a feature in terms of like how we turn that off or something. So I guess the point there is if you're using sort of off the shelf operator controller, the plan right now is that the only interaction you'll be able to have with the APIs is via the extension API. And like Varsha said, we need to go and figure out how we want to add support for non-registry v1 bundles from that API.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess the last point I would make real quick, sorry, Adam, is that when we were working on Ruckpack, we fairly easily implemented something that made it possible to use a different bundle type and add it to the catalog. So I don't anticipate it being a ton of work, although on the other hand, like that was very prototypey and we didn't do a ton of design around it. So this time around, we'll have to think about it a little more carefully. But in general, like I think overall, it's likely to be a fairly simple technical implementation to support something other than registry v1 bundles. Sorry.
Hey, Joe. Oh, go ahead.
Adam, were you gonna ask something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, the webhook makes sense because you don't want people creating, you know, two different APIs and one of them, you know, is directly to KApp and you don't know about it. And then, you know, we're trying to troubleshoot that. It wouldn't make sense. Just a clarifying question. So, you know, when this is integrated and, you know, ideal state, end state, are you saying that a Helm chart would live inside of an operator catalog? Would that be the only deployment, you know, mechanism, or could it deploy a chart directly, I guess?
So there's,
Or sorry, a chart that's in a different index that's not a catalog, not an
yeah,
operator catalog.
yeah. So I think we haven't gotten to this point yet. There's another thing that we haven't started working on yet, but it's something that I've wanted OLM to do for a while, and I know that some other GitOps focused groups are wanting it too, which is basically support for a direct bundle install. So like, I don't want to build a catalog and have to come up with packages and channels and all of that stuff. Like, I just want OLM to run my thing. So we've got something in our roadmap around direct bundle installs. So whatever that ends up looking like, that would support whatever bundle formats that the extension API supports. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but at
Yeah, I
least
mean, it
from the
would,
perspective of the extension API, the two paths would be it's either in a catalog or you just tell us the thing that you want to install directly, and we don't dereference from a catalog.
yeah, because the use case that I'm thinking of is that we already manage a Helm catalog, but it's not an operator catalog, right? Um, that people can install charts with, but it would be more ideal if that was managed by something other than Helm install, Helm upgrade, just from a visibility perspective, right? So that's the angle I'm coming at with these questions.
Yep. So in that case, the like the Helm repo in that case is what, like a standard Helm repo that you would interact with, like Helm repo add?
Yep, yeah, exactly. It's built into OpenShift today.
Got it. And then in terms of like actually pulling a specific chart, that's just an HTTP request that gives you a tar-gz of the bundle.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And then is there any, like, do you know of any use case around the repo being like the charts being OCI based? And like, does that change anything?
So that's the direction that we want to go, is OCI based, but there's some hurdles that we have to go over to get there. One of them is evangelism. The other one is some products that we support don't support that right now. So
Okay.
there's that. But that's like end state. We would like to get to the OCI model.
Yeah. So I think like looking at what we're trying to do for the direct install, like the very first thing we obviously think about is OCI because that's where all the registry v1 bundles live. We'll have to think about whether we want to support anything other than OCI via that API. And Ruckpack did that and CAP supports that. So maybe there's a way to do it, but we need to figure that part out. That's still TBD.
Cool. Thanks for the thorough explanation. That's all I had.
Yeah, thanks. Brett.
Yeah, I was just going back to the webhook. Do we think that webhook will actually, like, if there's CVEs that come along later raised in the components that we're walling off, will the webhook for sure mollify folks that we don't need to fix them?
No. I think it's there's a bunch of things that we would probably need to do. I think the idea is that with the webhook, if we don't allow arbitrary use of the APIs and we only limit it to what the extension API does, then CAP controller and its ilk are similar to any other dependency that we have that we pull from the internet and use essentially. So we would need to treat that CVE just like we treat the CVEs for any of our other dependencies.
Okay.
And sometimes the answer might be that code is completely unexercised and there's no chance of that CVE being hit. And so close on those grounds, but we would have to do the due diligence to essentially prove it. Otherwise, sometimes it's easier just to go and bump the version and pick up the fix.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, any other questions on this topic? Okay, and then last on the list is Bryce.
Yeah, so a while back, we had talked about like a mission statement / high level overview of like what OLM v1 is, like what functionality it's going to provide, stuff like that. And I know, Joe, when that was raised a while ago, you'd mentioned working on an internal document that you were working on, cleaning up and maybe having something that we can share upstream. Is that something that we're still planning on doing? I think it would be helpful with like in terms of making sure everybody is aligned with like what Red Hat like internally we're thinking would be helpful for OLM as well as the community to kind of see what we're thinking. So just kind of wondering if there's any plan to do that. And
Yeah, thanks for bringing that back up. We've been continuing to update that as we go and talk to different people internally. I think it's probably at a point now where it's not going to change a whole lot more. So yeah, I think we can probably take that doc and make sure it's all relevant to upstream. And I don't think there's a whole lot in it that's like Red Hat specific. But yeah, I think we're probably at the point now where we can go and do that exercise. And one of the things in there is a high level mission statement that at least I think most of Red Hat folks agree with, which it's not really any different than what you'd expect probably. But at least it lays out exactly sort of where we stand with what we can do in V1 and how things might change from V0. So I'd say maybe, Bryce, what we should do is try to, in the next, maybe in the next week, try to clean that up and make an upstream version of it and put it in the operator controller repo, maybe next to or as a replacement for the PRD, or I don't know, something along those lines. How do you feel about that?
yeah, I think that's fine. I think, part of the reason for bringing it up was kind of also like where, if we are going to do it, where are we thinking? I wonder if maybe like, I mean, it can be a separate file. It doesn't have to be in the README, but at least putting something in the README, maybe at the top of the README to like, especially if the mission statement, I think like that should definitely be the top of the README or something like that. That way, when somebody comes in, they know like what OLM v1 is going to do. So like, yeah, what makes sense to put in the README? What maybe makes more sense to put in a separate file that we can maybe like link to, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take this as an action item to at least help coordinate.
Okay. And then kind of one more thing in a similar vein. If I remember right, the internal document has like a draft roadmap. Is that something that we want to also kind of work on getting out? Is like maybe like a higher level roadmap that contains like all the functionality that we're planning on adding to OLM v1 in the near future?
The way that I would hope that we could go about that is by getting back to our GitHub roadmap style of work. And I don't think we're too far from that. We probably just need to make some placeholders and make sure they show up in the project, and then start actually using that to talk about you know, like this discussion that I was having here, it'd be nice if I could just bring up the operator framework OLMV1 project view in GitHub and talk about sort of the nuts and bolts of where we are. And then that in that same view, then you can see, okay, here's what we're sort of thinking in terms of how we're lining up the next bits of work and what those bits of work might look like.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that I'd raised in the past when we were looking at the GitHub roadmap is it seems very more in the weeds, and I'm thinking maybe a higher level roadmap for folks that like maybe aren't necessarily like don't even know what's going on yet. Like they come in and they like just want to see what the roadmap looks like at a higher level. I don't think we've had anything at that level. I think I've seen Carvel does it in a neat way where they've got, I think every month they update their roadmap, and it's just like a markdown file that contains like everything that they're working on. We could do it as like a GitHub project kind of thing where it's like, we have the high level brief issues that we've created, like the meta issues, and those can just all be in like a high level roadmap thing, because those I think are high enough level that they contain the information of like what we're currently working on and progressing towards. So
Yeah, real quick. So you can see what I'm thinking here. We've got this view, which shows like the various iterations. I think we should clean this up, right? And like the two things that I listed in our agenda doc, like it would be nice if those showed up right here under iteration 3. It's like, here's the two things. And then from there we have follow on, sub issues that span and start talking about the underlying bits. And then we can also like start putting stuff in future iterations that they're like brief level issues, but maybe we don't have any stories for them yet because we haven't done the designs. Or maybe the one sub issue in there is like write the brief or whatever. Do you think that would work?
I wonder if maybe like a Kanban board style might work better for this, because then we can have the different states that we have, like, yeah, so maybe something like that for the epics themselves, and you can have kind of like epics that are in progress, ones that haven't been started, ones that need briefs or designs or things like that.
Yeah, we can do that too. And we can like GitHub lets you build different views of the same thing. So we can look at that. Okay, well, Bryce, how about I might be putting you on the spot, but how about I give you an action to at least coordinate some discussion about how to get that stuff up to date and looking good.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, all right. I think that covers that. Any other questions on this particular bullet point or any other questions in general?
I know that the GitHub Docs operator controller has kind of languished a little bit. We lost track of that, but would we want to sort of maybe re-kick that effort off with the README, and then maybe before we get too much cruft and too much change, maybe work on, say, backporting the OpenShift, or not backporting, but taking the current like OpenShift tech preview docs and kind of getting like, zooming out and getting the most up-to-date versions and kind of starting over with that. That'd be.
Yeah, that's one thing we haven't talked about a whole lot, honestly, is I know like we talked last year about having docs come as part of all of the features that we implement as sort of like a rough, raw docs written by developers and then having a process where we can shape those into the, I think like the doc site and like have better user flow docs and persona docs and stuff like that. I would love to do that. I think there's an element of like, where do we want to focus our time? And you know, or does it make sense to write a whole bunch of upstream docs? In an ideal world, yes. I think we should probably keep discussing like exactly how we want that to work. But in general, I agree. Like if we can figure out like a nice balance, then we should do it.
Yeah, I'll last release last time we were in this position, I got kind of caught up in some other things, but I had a working proof of concept to convert the docs to markdown. So let me try to kick that off again and see how. Let me do that sort of with the current set, and then we can look at I'll get a PR for one part of it or something, and then we can see how much work, take a look maybe at how much work it would be to review and to get things in sync and then decide what we want to do. But converting the docs to markdown is actually kind of trivial. So it's just the review time. So why don't I put something together for that, and we'll see where that goes.
Cool. And if you've got like, if there's like a suggestion that you would have in terms of a better process or a better format or something that would just make things easier in general,
Mhm.
by all means, like I don't want to, like, I guess the most important thing is that like we have someone or a group of people that are interested in implementing and writing docs, be that developers or tech writers or whoever, contributors. And like if we can simplify that to make things have less friction, then that means we in general get better docs. So if
Yep.
you have suggestions on that, then let's talk about that too.
Okay. Yeah. There's actually a new mandate from the Red Hat Docs kind of org to support upstream more. So there's more resources and time I think I can spend on this going forward in the upstream. So it's actually kind of an OKR and things like that. So I'll sync with Alex De La Penta, and then we'll come up with some ideas about how we can kind of help with this more.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Anything else before we finish up? All right. Well, I think that concludes us then. Everybody have a great week. See you next week.